You see, in a city like New York in the 1920s, so full of noise and people rushing about, it was easy to be invisible. That's how I liked it. A child could vanish, and the city would just swallow them whole. I would walk the streets, just a thin old man. I know what they saw: harmless gray hair, a polite smile, a grandfather. I'd help the neighbors. I'd read to them from the Bible. You would have trusted me. You would have let me hold your child's hand. They didn't know what was behind my eyes. They called me names later in whispers. The Gray Man, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Brooklyn Vampire, the Boogeyman. But my name is Albert Fish, and they were wrong about me. I wasn't a monster. I was a messenger, and the message was pain. I was simply the one brave enough to deliver it. This is my story, the real story of the work I did in the one little letter that brought the whole world knocking at my door. It was 6 long years after I took little Grace Budd. Her mother, Delia, must have thought the world had forgotten, but I hadn't. I remembered everything. So, in November of 1934, I decided to write her a letter. I wanted her to know. A mother should know what happened to her child. I took her to an empty house in Westchester, I wrote. I stripped her naked. She kicked, bit, and scratched. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms. I told her everything. I had to. How I cooked her. How I ate her over 9 days. How sweet and tender her little roasted buttocks was. It was a sacrament. For 6 years, she had nothing but questions. I gave her the answers. It wasn't a taunt. It was a confession. Yes, but it was also a gift of truth. That letter was the map that would lead them to me, I suppose. But it was also a map that led directly into my soul. They tried to understand me by looking at the boy I was, Hamilton Fish, born in 1870. They talk about my family, the madness in my bloodline, as if that explains anything. My uncle's mania, my brother in the asylum, my mother hearing voices, they see it as a curse. I see it as a lineage. When my father died, I was sent to the St. John's orphanage. I was only 5. That place was not a home. It was a school. The lesson was pain. They beat us for everything, for nothing. The other boys would cry. But for me, it was different. I saw so many boys whipped. I later told them, it ruined my mind. Ruined? No, it opened it. I began to feel a strange stirring during the whippings, mine and others. Pain and pleasure. They weren't opposites. They were the same thing. They were 2 doors into the same holy room. When my mother took me back, the lesson had been learned. I continued my education on my own. I had a paddle, studded with nails from my own shoes. I had needles. They found them later, rusted in my bones, and they acted so surprised. Don't you see? I was testing myself, pushing my flesh to its limit to purify my spirit. I would soak cotton in alcohol, place it where the sun doesn't shine, and light a match. The fire was a cleansing. It was an offering. For me, pain was a prayer, and I was becoming a very, very religious man. I was learning to crave it. Not just my own pain, but the pain of others. That was the next step. The sacrament isn't complete without a sacrifice. My life on the outside was a masterpiece of misdirection. I was a house painter. It was the perfect trade. It let me into so many homes, so many neighborhoods. People let you in. They trust you. In 1898, I married. We had 6 children. They will tell you I was a good father, and I was. I never laid a hand on them. I raised them myself after their mother left me. That man, the father, the painter, was the mask I wore. It was the best hiding place in the world. My real work began slowly. Little things. They arrested me for passing bad checks. A joke. They even sent me to Sing Sing prison for a while in 1903. While they were busy with such trivialities, I was exploring my true nature. I began writing letters, obscene letters to women. It was a compulsion. And the violence I had perfected on myself, it was time to share it. Around 1910, I found a young man in Delaware, a slow boy. I kept him for 2 weeks. I taught him the gospel of pain. Then I moved on. I had my calling. I began to travel. I had children in every state. I told them it was true. I chose them carefully. The poor ones, the black ones, the ones with some slowness in mind. I knew the police wouldn't look too hard for them. Who would miss them? I would. I would remember them always. They were my congregation. The polite old man who smiled and tipped his hat was a plague, and I was spreading my faith, one forgotten child at a time. My best years, my most important work, were between 1924 and 1928. That is when I was at my most pure. It started with Francis McDonald. He was 8. I saw him playing. There was a man they saw nearby, a man they said was entirely gray. The Gray Man. I liked that name. I took the boy into the woods. I taught him what I knew. I gave him the final release from this world. I choked him with his own suspenders. It was quick. It was clean. It was clean. His body was found, but I was long gone. Another soul saved. Then, 3 years later, there was little Billy Gaffney, just 4 years old, playing in a hallway. His friend told the police the boogeyman took him. A child's fantasy, they thought. But children know things. I took Billy to an empty house. I did what was necessary. I purged him with pain, and then I took his flesh for my sacrament. There was nothing left. Billy was gone from this world, but he became a part of me. His remains were never found, because there were none to find. He lives on inside me. And then Grace. It all led to Grace. In 1928, I saw an ad in the paper. A boy, Edward Budd, looking for work. I went to their home as Frank Howard, a kind old farmer. I charmed them all. It was so easy. My eyes fell on 10-year-old Grace, a perfect blossom. I told her parents I was taking her to a child's party. They believed me. They smiled and waved goodbye. I took her to a quiet, empty house I'd found. Wisteria Cottage. A lovely name. I told her to pick flowers outside while I went upstairs to prepare. I took off all my clothes. One must not stain their garments during worship. Then I called her in. I did for her what I did for the others. I sent her to God. And then with my cleaver and my knives, I prepared the holy feast. I took her with me, and for 9 days she was my communion. For 6 years no one knew. Frank Howard had simply vanished. The family was left with nothing but my memory, the memory of a kind old man. I was free for 6 years. A ghost. The police had nothing. Grace, Billy, Francis, they were just sad stories with no ending. But something inside me, a force, demanded that the story be told. They called it a mania for writing. I call it revelation. I call it revelation. I had to bear witness to my own work, so I wrote to Delia Budd. I wrote it all down, every detail of my time with Grace. It was important that she understand the honor that had been bestowed upon her daughter. But I made a small human error. The stationery had a little mark on it, an emblem for a chauffeur's club, a detective, a man named King. He found it. He was a bulldog, I'll give him that. He followed that little emblem to a rooming house where I used to live. The landlady told him I was coming back to get a letter, so they waited for me. On December 13th, 1934, I walked in to get my mail. Detective King was standing there. I had a razor, but it was no use. They took me. At the station, the mask came off. There was no need for it anymore. I told them everything. I told them everything. I told them about Grace. I showed them where to find her bones, what was left of her near Wisteria Cottage. It wasn't my arrogance that undid me. It was my need to tell the truth. I wrote my own ending. I had to. The story was too important not to share. My trial in 1935 was a grand spectacle. They put my soul under a microscope. I told them I heard the voice of God, that he commanded me to sacrifice children. It was the truth. My lawyers said I was insane. Of course they did. They had to use words they could understand. A doctor, Frederick Wortham, he was fascinated by me. He interviewed me for hours. He said I had 18 different conditions. Every sexual abnormality they had a name for. He saw the x-rays of the needles in my pelvis. Psychosis. He called me a psychiatric phenomenon. He saw a collection of diseases. He didn't see a prophet. The prosecutor, he saw something else. He saw a cunning man, a planner, an organized predator. He was closer to the truth but still missed the point. He said I knew what I was doing was wrong. But that's the thing. It wasn't wrong. It was holy. It was necessary. My calmness wasn't the sign of a psychopath. It was the serenity of a man who is certain of his purpose. So, the jury had to choose. Was I insane or was I evil? They are such small words for what I am. They found me guilty. They said they knew I was insane, but that I was too dangerous to live. They chose to kill what they couldn't understand. On January 16th, 1936, they walked me to the electric chair at Sing Sing prison. They say I walked without resistance. Of course I did. Why would a man resist his own coronati? My case left a scar, they say. I became the real boogeyman. My story forced people to look into a darkness they pretend doesn't exist. They see contradictions. A good father who consumed children. A frail old man who was an apostle of violence. A religious man whose God demanded blood. I am not a contradiction. I am the truth. The truth is that evil doesn't have horns and a tail. Evil is the polite old man who smiles at your children. Evil is the gentle voice that offers a piece of candy. I am one of history's darkest figures. They whisper, not for how many I killed, but for the things I did. They call it depravity. I call it divinity. And now, you know my story. You resisted depravity. Stop.